Good afternoon, everyone, and thank you for joining the launch of the World Economic Situation and Prospects Report 2026. It's an annual UN flagship report, and we have three speakers from the UN Department of Economic and Social Affairs with us here today. Mr. Navid Hanif, the Assistant Secretary General for Economic Development, Mr. Shantanu Mukherjee, Director of the Economic Analysis and Policy Division, and Mr. Ingo Pitterle, Officer in charge of the Global Economic Monitoring Branch. I will start by giving the floor to Assistant Secretary General Hanif, who will deliver introductory remarks on behalf of Undersecretary General Lee. Please, Mr. Hanif.
Thank you. Good afternoon. I'm going to deliver USG Lee's remarks, and his regrets he couldn't join in person. So members of the press, thank you for joining us at the launch of this year's report on the world economic and social prospects. As in previous years, this report was prepared by the UN Department of Economic and Social Affairs in close partnership for the UN Conference on Trade and Development and the 5 UN regional commissions, with valuable contributions from the UN Tourism Organization. I would like to express my sincere gratitude for this long-standing and effective collaboration with these partners. As we bid farewell to a turbulent 2025, our assessment indicates that the global economy has demonstrated resilience. Growth has remained steady, below pre-pandemic rates, but stronger than previously anticipated. We project economic growth to stabilize at 2.7% this year, compared to 2.8% in 2025. Last year, sharp tariff hikes disrupted global trade. Yet the system proved more resilient than anticipated. But resilience should not be mistaken for strength. Beneath the headline numbers lie persistent risks and deep imbalances. For instance, high debt burdens and shrinking fiscal space are constraining investment. Elevated policy uncertainty continues to dampen confidence. We expect trade growth to moderate under the combined pressure of protectionist measures and geopolitical tensions. At the same time, cost of living pressures persist, hitting poor households the hardest. Gender gaps remain wide, and youth unemployment continues to be stubbornly high. Climate shocks add yet another layer of complexity, disrupting supply chains, raising prices, and threatening livelihoods. And while artificial intelligence holds the promise of boosting productivity and growth, its potential to deepen inequalities is a matter of serious concern. The message is clear. Resilience alone will not deliver the sustainable development goals, which remain off track. Our report emphasizes that progress is achievable but only through a balanced policy mix and stronger, more effective global cooperation. The blueprints for sustainable development are already in place. From the Seville commitment at the 4th International Conference on Financing for Development to the Doha Declaration of the Second World Summit on Social Development and COP30's Belém package on climate action. What is missing is not ambition, but implementation at scale and with speed. What is needed now is strong, coordinated action towards implementation. We believe this report will serve as a valuable resource for these efforts, offering guidance to build a more inclusive, stable, and sustainable global economy. This ends Mr. Lee's remarks. I invite my colleagues to share further details of the report. And I regret that I will also have to leave for the engagement that we have to attend to shortly. Thank you so much. Over to you, Shantanu.
Thank you, Mr. Hanif. Thank you very much. Please, Mr. Mukherjee.
Thank you, Martina. I'd like to share some additional details of the World Economic Situation and Prospects report from this year. As in past years, our report presents its survey and forecasts of the global economy, as well as that of identified regions and countries. And this year, we have a special chapter looking at the dynamics of inflation and prices and what they mean for sustainable development. As the ASG observed, we are heading into 2026 with the economy having demonstrated considerable resilience at the global level across several fronts. He spoke about our GDP growth forecasts, which are looking fairly stable at around 2.7% for 2026, slightly lower than what it was in 2025, 2.8% and 2.9% in 2024. Inflation, which has been a bugbear for a while, has also been falling globally and is projected to decline to 3.1% in 2026, continuing the trend over the entire year, last year, where it was at around 3.4%. Trade growth remains solid, and among other broadly beneficial developments are a global trend towards monetary easing and improved cross-border financial flows. However, this resilience that we are speaking about is necessary for progress, but it will not be sufficient. And that's because a lot of ground has been lost. This is because years of subpar growth at the global level, the average over the pre-pandemic decade was 3.2%, and since then we have remained stubbornly below that, have resulted in divergences across countries. One indication of this comes from looking at the average rate at which the GDP per person has been growing in different parts of the world. In developed countries, where GDP per person was already quite high, it continued to grow at an increasing rate, from 1.2% in the 2000s all the way through to 1.7% in the post-pandemic period over the last years. While developing countries have also seen some growth in GDP per person, the pace has been slowing down. In the most recent period, it has been 3.3%, lower than the 4.3% of the 2000s. The same pattern is repeated across many developing regions and country groups. For the least developed countries, the slowdown is especially stark, a growth rate of only 1.2% over the last 3 years compared to 4% in the 2000s. So actually the question we have to ask is, how can countries and populations catch up when rates of progress have been slowing down? Pressures are evident at all levels. For households, for example, our report shows that wage and income increases tended to keep pace on average with rising price levels before the pandemic. But since then, although price levels accelerated up, wage increases didn't grow at the same rate. They have fallen behind. The resulting squeeze on living standards is particularly severe for the less well-off, limiting their prospects for development and increasing inequalities. But if we look beyond households at the macro level too, there are stark differences, and I will just look at financing capacities. Let me mention a couple of points here. I mentioned earlier that access to international financial markets has improved for developing countries on average, but the rates at which they can borrow are even now 2 to 3 times higher on average than for developed countries. In developing countries, about 12% of public revenues go towards interest payments in 2025. In least developed countries, this is close to 20%, squeezing further the resources for public investment. Our survey shows that a far smaller proportion of developing countries have the capacity to adopt expansionary fiscal policies relative to developed countries. And the outlook for official development assistance, which might have mitigated some of these constraints, is also bleak. If cuts as announced are implemented, ODA levels would fall to those last seen in 2020, with some of the most vulnerable countries facing the largest proportional declines. So, against this backdrop of inadequate growth, limited fiscal space, high levels of uncertainty, and persistent risks, including to the inflation outlook, our report argues that progress can be made through a balanced and forward-looking mix of monetary, fiscal, and industrial policies within countries, boosted by global cooperation in the implementation of recent commitments. I will now hand over to Ingo Pitel for a more in-depth look at our report.
Thank you, and good afternoon, ladies and gentlemen. So I will share some additional insights with the support of a few slides on how we see the global economy evolving this year. As was already highlighted, the global economy is heading into 2026 on a steady but subdued path. Overall, the world economy has weathered the sharp increase in US tariffs from an average effective rate of 2.5% to almost 15%, and the broader economic uncertainty better than many had feared, avoiding a major downturn. But that doesn't mean the turbulences of 2025 left no mark. Policy uncertainty is still elevated, trade frictions persist, and fiscal risks are substantial. Add ongoing geopolitical tensions, and the result is an outlook that will remain challenging over the next couple of years. At the same time, there are some tailwinds. Inflation continues to decline, and monetary easing should support consumer demand and investment. In addition, several major economies have introduced targeted fiscal support to strengthen strategic sectors and boost growth. From a sustainable development perspective, however, progress is lagging. Poverty reduction remains slow, with extreme poverty increasingly concentrated in sub-Saharan Africa and in conflict-affected countries. Benefits from growth are often concentrated within a narrow range of economic sectors and population groups, leaving many communities behind. And 2025 brought yet another record for global carbon emissions, which is a stark reminder that the world remains off track in achieving its climate goals. Let me now turn to the regional picture. Compared with our mid-2025 forecast, we have revised growth upward for most regions. In the developed economies, we anticipate modest growth of 1.6% in 2026, the same pace as last year. Support will come from consumer demand and lower interest rates, and in some cases, the United States, Japan, and Germany, for example, from expansionary fiscal policies. In the United States, specifically, we project moderate growth of 2% this year, even as the labor market is weakening. Across developing regions, the picture is mixed. In Africa, we forecast growth to edge up to 4%, supported by improving macroeconomic stability in several large economies, such as Egypt and Nigeria. However, many countries continue to grapple with structural bottlenecks, heavy debt burdens, and conflict. In East Asia, growth remains solid, although it is expected to ease to 4.4% this year, as the effects of trade front loading fade and China's growth moderates to 4.6%. South Asia will remain the world's fastest growing region, expanding by 5.6%. Much of this strength comes from India, where robust domestic demand, easing inflation, supported by a strong harvest, and continued policy support are driving growth. Turning to Western Asia, we expect growth to accelerate to 4.1%, reflecting higher oil production and some improvements in security conditions. In Latin America and the Caribbean, growth prospects are modest. GDP is forecast to rise by 2.3%, which is similar to last year, but above the 2010 to 19 average, though trade and policy uncertainty pose considerable risks. And finally, in the least developed countries, we project growth to accelerate to 4.6%, driven by improving macroeconomic conditions in several large economies. But even with these gains, average growth will remain well below the 7% target set under the SDGs. One of the surprises of the past year was the strength of global trade. Despite all the uncertainty around tariffs and trade policy, trade expanded far more than expected, according to our estimates by 3.8%, a full percentage point faster than global GDP. This resilience reflects several factors. First, many firms front-loaded shipments to the US ahead of tariff increases, especially in the first half of the year. Second, supply chains were swiftly reconfigured and diversified, with stronger trade and production linkages among developing economies. And third, the AI boom boosted demand for semiconductors, digital equipment, and IT services, supporting both goods and services trade. Looking ahead, trade growth will likely moderate to around 2.2% in 2026, as front-loading effects fade and higher trade barriers start to bite. Global investment, meanwhile, is being shaped by competing forces. Persistent headwinds on one side, new sources of momentum on the other. On one hand, macroeconomic uncertainty, limited fiscal space, and structural challenges continue to restrain investment in many economies. On the other, lower interest rates and strong confidence in technology sectors are supporting investment, especially AI-related spending on digital infrastructure and data centers, led by the US. Labor markets remain broadly stable, with global unemployment near record lows. However, a question for 2026 is whether we'll start to see a clearer effects on labor markets from trade barriers and especially from the rapid adoption of AI technologies, which could reshape employment and productivity dynamics. Inflation continues to fall worldwide due to easing supply pressures and lower commodity prices. Global headline inflation is projected to decline from 3.4% in 2025 to 3.1% in 2026. But progress in bringing inflation back to central bank targets is uneven. Compared with the pre-pandemic period, more countries now face high inflation above 20%, while fewer have very low inflation below 2%. And even where headline inflation has fallen, households still feel the squeeze. Vulnerable households who spend more of their income on essentials such as food and housing tend to face higher effective inflation. And this is exacerbating inequality. Looking ahead, inflation is likely to stay volatile, with potential shocks from conflict, climate events, geopolitical fragmentation, and trade disruptions. Turning to the policy front, the global shift towards monetary easing is expected to continue into 2026. We are likely to see more divergence, however, as central banks are at different stages of the cycle and face different inflation and growth trends. Global financial conditions remain broadly supportive, helping to sustain portfolio flows to emerging markets and supporting local currencies. Yet financial risks are mounting, from stretched valuations in technology to the rapid expansion of non-bank financial institutions, which is adding to systemic vulnerabilities. Fiscal conditions remain challenging. Many developing countries face severe financing constraints and heavy debt burdens. In 2025, about half of developing economies spent more than 10% of government revenues on interest payments, limiting the room for essential public investment. Spending priorities are also shifting in a number of countries, with higher military expenditure often coming at the expense of social and development programs. If that trend continues, the world's most vulnerable people and economies will bear the heaviest cost. Let me conclude with a few reflections on the policy front. I want to highlight two key priorities. First, at the domestic level, economies need greater coherence and better alignment across macroeconomic policies. As the report highlights, managing inflation, for example, cannot rest with central banks alone. It calls for coordinated fiscal action, targeted social protection, and medium-term investment strategies that ease supply constraints and anchor price stability over time. Second, many of the challenges countries face are global and deeply interconnected. From debt vulnerabilities and climate risk to trade tensions, price pressures, and the rapid advance of new technologies. Addressing these challenges will require stronger international cooperation, supported by effective regulatory frameworks that ensure stability and shared progress. In this context, recent global initiatives on finance, social development, and climate are encouraging. The key challenge for 2026 and beyond is to turn the commitments we have seen into concrete actions. Thank you for your attention, and I invite all of you to explore the full World Economic Situations and Prospects 2026, which is now available online.
Thank you very much. And we're now happy to take some questions. Yes.
Hi, Shudachi with China Central Television. First, on behalf of the UN Correspondent Association, thank you very much for this briefing. I have two questions. Well, first, on Venezuela, we noticed the latest development in Venezuela and the U.S. claim to have the oil. Have you ever analyzed what impact could the change of the oil export of Venezuela impact the global economy? And secondly, how much do you think China would still play a role in the 2026 economic growth in the world? Thank you.
I should just mention, in a sort of off-the-cuff kind of way, that our report tends to have a cutoff date within which we use the data. So, but having said that, clearly developments in Venezuela are on everyone's minds. The economic situation in Venezuela has not been great for some time. Macroeconomic management has been poor. Over the last decade, GDP contracted by around 70%. There was hyperinflation. Living conditions have deteriorated, and about a large fraction of the population is living abroad. Now, regarding Venezuela's the effect of any change in Venezuela's oil supply on world markets, my understanding is that the proportion of oil that is traded on the world markets and originating from Venezuela is actually quite small. So on a proportional basis, we don't expect there to be much change. On the other hand, we also know that throughout this year, international oil prices have tended to be quite low. And that has had economic implications in various ways. But like I said, because the proportion of Venezuelan oil as a fraction of the total amount is relatively low, we don't expect the scenario to change much. Anything more, Indo, on this side?
Let me just add that for Venezuela that the reserves are very large, but the oil output is relatively small. And we also have seen that the market reactions were very muted. And so I think this is a clear signal that from a global perspective, from a purely global perspective, the oil, the reduced oil or the change in oil here is not going to be a major factor in the short term.
You also maybe Ingo, you can take that. I'm not able to locate this PowerPoint. Yeah.
So for China, we are we have our estimate for 2025 is 4.9%, and then we expect a moderation in growth to 4.6%. Is that correct?
Yeah,
for
4.6%.
4.6%.
Yes.
In doing so, considering the large size of China's economy, of course, this will make a significant contribution to global growth, as it has been for many years now. So we're seeing just a somewhat challenging global environment, and in that context, we expect this moderation in growth.
Thank you. My name is Ibtisam Azim, Al Arabi Al Jadid newspaper. I have a couple of follow-ups. The first, you talked about in the report about and here also, that the inflation is down, but prices are still up. And you mentioned the tariffs, but I'm wondering if there is also other reasons why consumers are still, in many places of the world, still feeling the extremely high prices and why they are not going down. And then the other issue, also in the press statement, you talk about the AI and the gains from AI, but you also say that they are likely to be unevenly distributed, risking widening of existing structural inequalities. If you could elaborate on that. Thank you.
Let me take your question on inflation. So prices of selected commodities do go up and down. So as we were discussing right now, the price of oil has come down. But the overall price level in the economy, which is all the prices kind of added up in an average sense, that's what we are talking about when it comes to inflation. That is very slow to change and generally does not come down. What happens is that sometimes higher prices are a motivation for producing things more efficiently, so you get the same product produced in a different way. Or households adjust a little bit their behavior if wages have gone up proportionately. I think what's important to keep in mind for us is how are wages and inflation working together? So if inflation is going up but wages are stagnant, clearly people have limited resources with which to have the same quality of life that they had before. And then there are systemic factors as well. For example, in many countries, housing is in limited supply. And so rents and housing prices, these remain high and are difficult to bring down. And so inflation prices remains at a relatively high level. So there's a different set of factors in different countries. And what we are seeing right now is that globally inflation is going down, but there are certain countries where this trend is not being followed and inflation continues to rise. But in general, these higher prices do impose considerable hardships on households.
Let me just add here on inflation that one point we're making in the thematic chapter is that going forward, we see that potential risks for inflation to be both relatively more volatile than we had seen for some time, but also in some cases then elevated. So we see some uncertainty around the inflation trajectory, and that's related to, that you mentioned the tariffs, but also the overall geo-economic or geopolitical fragmentation. Yeah? It might be also related to some demographic shifts we're seeing. And other potential supply constraints. Yeah? So that's why we're calling for some rethinking of this, and not assuming that because the latest inflation episode is largely over with these extremely high rates, that the problem has been solved once and for all. On your question about AI, Yeah, we are highlighting in the report how strongly the investment in AI, especially in data centers, is concentrated from a global perspective, and this, of course, brings the risk that the benefits will also then be very much focused in specific countries and even within these countries in very specific segments. And also one aspect which needs to be highlighted is that there are certain labor requirements or human capital requirements which are needed and which many countries very simply do not have. So we're just warning that and advocating for ways that would make sure that these benefits are shared more evenly.
Yes, sir.
Thank you for this press conference. Stefano Vaccara, Ital Press, La Voce di New York. You said that the data show that the growth in 2025 has been higher than you expected, right? Can you tell us, can you calculate of that percentage of growth, which one is sustainable, is a good growth, and which one is not, means is an old growth that we should not pursue, at least according to the Sustainable Development Goals and so on?
This is a hard question because essentially there are two issues here that I think we at the UN like to keep in mind. The first is, how are the benefits of growth shared? And is it actually reaching all sections of the population, preferably giving a long-term boost to the people who are less well off? And I think it's in this context that my colleague also spoke about AI, where we would like countries to prepare their populations to take advantage, to use AI to boost their own incomes, to be able to work with it. So this question of how growth is shared across the population is an important one, and there isn't like a fixed answer for this. The second part of this question, of course, is a little bit related to the costs of producing this growth. And if there are larger impacts on the environment in an irreversible way, or in terms of CO2, then one of our policy recommendations, in fact, is that the technologies and the markets are quite ripe for countries to invest in renewable energy, climate-resilient agriculture, low-carbon technologies, all of which will drive growth, but will also have the benefit of securing supply chains, stabilizing prices, and create foundations for stronger economies. I don't think I've actually got to your question about can we split up how the growth is beneficial or not. That's difficult, but I think we try to assess how evenly growth is shared and how much long-term benefits it brings to society.
Any other questions? A follow-up?
I'm not sure that I was clear with my question. The sense that is, when I was splitting good growth and bad growth, I was not really talking about how growth goes, his share with people and helps people and so on. I thought it's a very important point, this, but I was just talking about basically, can we afford this growth? Because on the hand, I mean, we're talking like a good news that we had growth, but if this growth is another step toward destruction of the planet, so that's what I was trying to calculating. I understand that it's very difficult to calculate it, but so did you try at least to do a difference between the two growth, or is impossible to do?
I think that's a difficult question to resolve. It can be done, but I would also say that in countries where extreme poverty levels are 10, 15, 20%, and and the only way to get out of it is to have sufficient growth with good economic opportunities. The perspective of that country on what is an adequate amount of growth is likely to be very different from countries in other parts of the world. So I think it's not a global standard that one can apply here, but one has to keep in mind the local realities and circumstances when one is trying to assess the rates of growth. In our report, we do say that there is catch-up to be done by poorer countries, but we also say that this catch-up can be done in ways that are more sustainable, climate resilient, and use renewable energies.
Yes.
Thank you very much for the briefing. I am Muna Autul with Al-Quds Al-Arabi. I have two questions, and I'm adding to what my colleague just mentioned on the environment. We want to ask about a problem that cuts across many SDGs that you track, specifically health and water and marine ecosystems. There is recent research that shows that for example, plastic pollution causes up to $930 billion every single year in health costs just in the United States alone. So when you evaluate the SDG progress, are these public health and environmental costs integrated into your analysis? And because if plastic is causing directly trillions of dollars in health damage while poisoning water, that seems directly relevant to measuring whether we are achieving these goals or not.
So I think that's a very relevant question. The report is focused on macroeconomic issues and with some development implications. So the question about plastic and pollution is not directly addressed in the report, even though it is from a development perspective, from a well-being perspective, this is an important area. We are trying in the report for many years now to broaden the scope and go beyond GDP. You will find in this report throughout all three chapters many references to indicators associated with well-being beyond GDP. Aim to provide a broader perspective to also capture the aspects which matter for the quality of life and which these very narrow economic measures cannot capture. But the issue about plastic pollution itself is not directly covered.
I would also add that the Secretary General has appointed a high-level panel to look at what kind of indicators can actually take us beyond GDP in the kind of more meaningful and holistic way that you're asking about. And this panel should be submitting its report a little bit later this year. And we expect to have significant insights and guidance on how to present a more comprehensive picture of development and well-being.
Yes.
Arun Lewis from Indo-Asian News Service. I have a series of questions. One is, could you explain a little more on how India managed to overcome the impact of the 50% tariff? And what is the path for India for more sustained growth? And finally, how does the impact of rearranging of the supply chain work for India? And also, I might add, in terms of your references to artificial intelligence, what would be the impact on India, which is both, which is mainly outsourcing hub for digital work?
So yeah, let me say something about the macroeconomic situation currently in India. For India, we have significantly upgraded our 2025 estimate, and also our forecast for 2026 was upgraded. And this reflects an exceptional combination of factors which have all worked in the direction of stronger growth in India, of a very dynamic economy. I think we have seen already that consumer demand and also public investment was strong. But with inflation falling significantly, partly due to a very abundant harvest, the central bank could also lower interest rate and provide a monetary impulse. So we had monetary impulse, we had a fiscal impulse through investment, and we had a positive impact on GDP from the agricultural sector on top of all the other strong growth drivers India was having. So that's why we're seeing exceptionally high growth, even in a context of a relatively challenging global environment.
I should also add that there has been diversification of India's export markets to the EU and to the Middle East. Ingo already mentioned that domestic drivers of growth have been exceptionally strong, and there has been good revenue collection as well. And as you know, one of the strongest exports from India at this point in time is services exports. And this has remained resilient even if merchandise exports have been affected by tariffs. And perhaps one way for India to continue to take advantage as AI is involved, is to further strengthen its services exports and rely on its skilled manpower to develop some of the applications that will take AI into a productivity boosting factor rather beyond where it is right now.
I
Quick follow-up.
don't mean to put you on a spot, but President Trump had singled out UNDESA as one of the organizations that he was going to be withdrawing from. Any comments on that?
Maybe I think our spokesperson addressed that issue, but like I said, we have a cutoff here of the 1st of December, and you're asking me about something that happened last night. So I'm not quite sure best place to respond to that. Economists tend to be a little bit cautious on these things. So.
Yes.
Thank you. This is Yun Zhaopan from China's Xinhua News Agency. I have a question about on U.S. tariffs. The U.S. announced tariffs on most countries last year, and it has created uncertainty for world economic growth. So do you have any statistics as to which degree the tariffs has on world economic growth last year and this year also? Thank you.
You must start in the front load.
So the tariffs were, in our previous analysis in mid-2025, we, just like everyone else, highlighted this impact on uncertainty and also the direct impact from the tariffs themselves. What we have seen is that the global trading system has actually shown a higher degree of resilience than we had expected, and that the front-loading effects, which we were observing, were even stronger than what was anticipated. So this has actually led to some positive impact on trade, and through trade also on the global economy here, especially during the first half of the year. At the same time, the effects of this elevated uncertainty are still there, and they have not completely gone away. So there is an impact. We expect to see an impact on investment in some parts of the world economy. And we also expect global trade growth to somewhat decelerate in 2026 when we see that some of these positive effects like the front loading, like the effects associated with inventories will fade.
So if I can add a bit more context to this. If you look at our prediction of the world economy as of mid-2025, when, like most economists, we were taking the stated values of tariffs as the actual values that would be observed. And so looking at an effective tariff rate in the US going up from about 2.5% to 28% almost, our predictions were actually for the world economy quite dire and still growth, but much less. But since that time, what has become apparent is that although the announced rates were very high, in the process of implementation, the actual effective rates have been lower, partly because, as Ingo said, people front-loaded shipments to avoid the tariffs, partly because there were often exemptions for various categories of goods, and also because over the years, some kinds of deals, bilateral deals, were struck. So overall, if you look at how much has been collected in terms of tariffs, in terms of revenue, it turns out that the effective rate is about 15%, not 28%, as we had thought. That's still very high because it started at 2.5%. So we are seeing, multiple times increase. But the effect of that slightly smaller increase has actually been to contribute to the resilience of this year's growth. Now, some of these effects happened because shipments were front-loaded. A recent survey shows that some businesses in the US actually did not raise prices as they could have. They took the hit themselves. We expect some of these effects to dissipate over time. And so perhaps absent further developments in terms of negotiations with countries or other actors, there may be a risk here of a further clamping down on trade, which is what we are also projecting in our report, a slowdown going forward. So we are watching this space very carefully.
The last question? Yeah.
Thank you, that's very nice. Two follow-ups. Follow-up on my colleague's question regarding the US withdrawal. I understand you don't want directly to comment on that, but my question is more technical, whether you believe this will have effect on your work. And then a last question on the Arab region, the Arab countries, and I do understand it's different between Gulf states and other places, but if we could get an estimation. Thank you.
I think it's fair to say that the announcement yesterday was unprecedented. And so I think it's really too early to think about what the consequences could be for the way we work and for what we take forward. Secretary General has said very clearly that we will continue to deliver on our mandates, which are given to us by our member states, and we will work on that basis.
Yeah, on Western Asia or the Arab countries, as you already pointed out, we're seeing this difference between the Gulf countries, the oil exporters, and some other countries in the regions. For the oil exporters, we expect to see a significant uptick in growth this year because of a greater oil production. So this is pretty clear. For the other countries in the region, the economic environment is more uncertain. We're seeing some progress in security conditions in parts of the region, which provides some glimmers of hope that for a recovery. But this is very tentative and uncertain, and we'll have to follow that very closely. And of course, then even within the other group of countries, there are significant differences between the individual country situations.
Thank you very much. We'll conclude here. Thank you all for your interest, and thanks to the speakers.